Hey there, here's another book recommendations video for all your Christmas shopping needs. Thinking about it, may have been a better idea to upload this before Christmas, but oh well, get yourself something for January instead. Of course, I'll timestamp this, so if you want to jump to a particular book, then just take a look at the pinned comment. If you'd like more book recommendations, I made a few more on my channel that I put in a playlist for ease of access. Let's get started. The first book is Settlers, The Mythology of the White Proletariat by J. Sakai. Let's start off with something spicy. This is a monumental work, in my opinion, and definitely should be mandatory reading for anyone on the left, especially those in the United States. With a sufficient theoretical background, this is definitely one of the most powerful works I've read since my early days as a Marxist. Now, don't let the rather inflammatory title scare you away. It's not saying that there's no such thing as a white proletariat. What it is saying, and just the general message of the book as a whole, is that the United States started, and remains, a settler society tailored and biased towards Euro-Americans at the expense of Native American, Black, and Chicano populations. Sakai expertly takes you through the early history of the United States, discussing the political and economic consolidation of American land, primarily by and for the white population. He follows this with a very eye-opening discussion of trade unionism and labor organization in the settler context, showing how even staple leftist organizing was influenced in favor of white workers. This part is especially interesting as a lot of industry or economic activity in general was created and nourished by blacks and Native Americans in some cases, and Asian Americans and Chicanos in others. Especially interesting is the systemic deportation of these communities from the economic activity they created and laid the foundations for, and the import of white populations in their place, which shows how settlerism, as an ideological force, long outlasted the days of manifest destiny. His lucid analysis of World War II and its effects on non-white workers within the US are my personal favorite parts of the book. Now, the general controversy around settlers usually is due to two things. The first being Sakai's criticism of the communist movement within the US as a settler movement that fizzled out not due to McCarthyist repression, but due to the inherent contradiction between settlers, usually white, and non-settler labor. The second being his 12th chapter, in which he outlines how the settler population has, in essence, been raised into a position of labor aristocracy so high it negates or even disallows class consciousness. He follows this with the controversial idea that essentially only the Third World classifies as proletarian, with the partial inclusion of non-settler populations in the US as part of this Third World. He definitely isn't the first to have a form of this opinion, as the concept of the labor aristocracy goes back as far as Engels and Lenin. Many contemporary writers also hold similar views. Whether you agree with this or not is beside the point. It in no way affects the general message of the book, which is that the US, as a settler colonial nation, has certain contradictions within the proletariat that are muddied with racial associations and the very history of the nation. Don't think Sakai has some blanket condemnation of white people or any other mistaken ideas. In fact, the book is replete with statistics and percentage breakdowns coupled with incredibly nuanced analyses and explanations. If you are American, I'm not just recommending this book, I'm telling you to go read it, right now, if possible. The second book on this list is Killing Hope by William Blum. I haven't recommended this book before and I honestly don't know why, although I did mention it at the end of my America Never Stood for Freedom video. I first read this many years ago and have recently reread it. In this book, Blum carries us through the things that we're supposed to know already, that the CIA interventions around the world were carried out on paper to fight communism, but in reality were done in order to further extend American interests. The two are rarely separated. What's great about this book is that it completely dispels the myth that the US stands for democracy, human rights, any sort of judicial rights, or anything else of the sort. It shows how the US will not shy away from anything, be it meddling in elections, invasions, assassinations, torture, or whatever else, as long as it furthers US interests, that meaning further extending the profits of the American ruling class. It covers the actions of the US in dozens of countries, from Central America to the Middle East and beyond. Blum has an interesting way of writing, with entertaining and sometimes sarcastic commentary that does keep the book from getting dry. I'd recommend you pick this one up, even if you think you're particularly well versed in the crimes of the US worldwide. You'll definitely learn something new. Hell, there's so many examples that even I forget some of them. The third book on this list is Latin American Diaries by Ernesto Guevara. You know it isn't a book recommendations video made by me without a book on Guevara. In this one, Guevara is a recent medical graduate and decides to go on the road again, much like he did a few years prior, on a journey through Latin America. I'll level with you. This one is not nearly as important, in my opinion, as the Motorcycle Diaries or Reminiscences of the Cuban Revolutionary War. So why am I recommending it? Well, as part of my obsession with Guevara, I feel the need to push at least one book, every once in a while, into the hands of an unsuspecting person nearby. That doesn't mean it's not worth reading, far from it. Reading it, I think you'll find the most important part of the book is the time Guevara spent in Guatemala. Why? Because he was there right as the CIA attack on Guatemala occurred, in attempt to oust the democratically elected leftist Jacobo Arbenz. Not only was he there, but he attempted to mobilize with some other comrades in order to defend Arbenz's government. Here, he also met some Cuban exiles linked to Castro. Between Guevara's discussions of these two things, you get a better image of the man himself. My recommendation is to read this book after the Motorcycle Diaries and before Reminiscences so that you can feel the continuity of Guevara's growth as a revolutionary. You may even find some interesting parallels between your life and growth as a Marxist and Guevara's. Give it a read. The final book on this list is Black Skin, White Masks by Frantz Fanon, another masterpiece of Fanon that I recently reread. In this work, Fanon shows how colonial attitudes affect both the colonizer and the colonized, intermixed with his own experiences. He develops and explains the sense of inferiority certain colonial people experience and how they cope with said imagined inferiority. Whether through a black woman seeing liberation of her own blackness in marrying a white man, as the discourse on I Am a Martinican Woman shows, or in the colonial male's conception of sexuality with white women taking on an anti-colonial sense, Fanon shows how the colonizer atrophies the culture and psychological expression of the colonized, while the colonized, through struggle, attempts to retain or regain their sense of themselves, their history, culture, and dignity. All of which is an expression of violence both on the colonizer's and colonized part. I'm only scratching the surface of Fanon's fantastic analysis. For a book of only 200-something pages, it's surprisingly dense with concepts still relevant both to still remaining colonial populations as well as post-colonial people who have to contend to this day with the colonial cultural hegemony that remains in the post-colonial nations, as much as you can call them post-colonial. Remember that neocolonialism marches on ever present today. It's a shame that there isn't one large volume of the collected works of Fanon to be bought anywhere. Pick this one up after reading The Wretched of the Earth and everything else Fanon wrote. He really is a fantastic writer and I cannot recommend any of his work enough. And that's about it. What's that, you say? Why so few books this time around? Well, that's kind of my fault. I've been really busy with work, as well as being on a rereading Lenin and Marx binge recently, along with the driest possible works on political economy. Marx and Lenin should already be recommended reading for you, and I could not in good sense recommend the other stuff to any of you as it almost puts me to sleep. And being in the medical field, dry academic literature is my entire life at this point. However, I've recently got some very interesting books, so the next book recommendations video will probably be a lot more packed.